There are people who look like they're doing everything right. They wake up early, they go to work, they pay their bills, they try to be careful with money. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. And yet, money feels heavy. Not in a dramatic way, not like panic or crisis. Just a quiet weight that never really leaves. It shows up when you think about the future, when you make decisions, when you check your balance, even if the number is fine. It's the feeling that no matter how responsible you are, money still takes up too much space in your head. What makes this feeling confusing is that it doesn't match the facts. You might not be broke. You might even be earning more than you ever have before. And still, money doesn't feel lighter. If anything, it feels heavier. This audiobook is not about how to make more money. It's not about hustle, side hustles, or financial tricks. It's about understanding why money feels heavy in the first place, especially for people who are trying to be smart, careful, and responsible. Because for most people, money stopped being just money a long time ago. At some point, money became tied to safety, to stability, to the fear of falling behind. It became something you don't just use. You carry. You carry it when you hesitate before spending on yourself. You carry it when you compare your life to someone else's. You carry it when you wonder how one mistake could undo years of effort. And the strange part is this: the harder you try to get money right, the heavier it often feels. That's because money is not just a financial topic. It's an emotional one. Long before you ever learned how to earn or save, money was already teaching you lessons. You learned them through your environment, through stress you could feel even if no one explained it to you, through moments when money created tension, silence, or worry. So when you think about money today, you're not starting from zero. You're bringing years of emotional memory with you. This is why two people can earn the same amount and feel completely different. One feels calm, the other feels constant pressure. One sees money as a tool, the other sees it as something that could disappear at any moment. The difference isn't intelligence, it isn't discipline, it's relationship. Money feels heavy when it becomes responsible for too much. When it's expected to provide certainty. When it's expected to protect you from fear. When it's expected to prove that you're doing okay in life. Once money carries those roles, it stops feeling neutral. Every decision feels loaded. Every expense feels symbolic. Every comparison feels personal. And most people never stop to question this. They assume the solution is to earn more, to plan better, to try harder. But what if the heaviness isn't coming from your income? What if it's coming from the way money lives in your mind? This audiobook is an invitation to look at money from a different angle, not as a problem to fix, but as a relationship to understand. We'll explore where this weight comes from, why earning more often doesn't remove it, how fear and comparison quietly shape your financial life, and why financial peace usually comes before financial growth, not after. Nothing here will ask you to gamble your future. Nothing will promise quick results. This is about clarity, and clarity has a way of making heavy things feel lighter. If you're listening to this and thinking, this feels familiar, then you're not alone. And if you know someone, a friend, a sibling, a colleague, who seems fine on the surface but quietly struggles with money stress, someone who carries this invisible weight every day, please share this video with them, not because it has all the answers, but because feeling understood is often the first step toward change. Sometimes the greatest relief isn't more money. It's finally understanding why money has felt so heavy all along. Chapter 1. Money is emotional long before it becomes logical. By the time you start making financial decisions on your own, money has already shaped you. Not through numbers, not through lessons, but through experience. Most people assume their relationship with money begins when they earn their first paycheck or open their first bank account. In reality, it begins much earlier. It begins in moments you barely remember. The tone of a conversation when bills were due. The silence that followed a purchase that felt too expensive. The way adults reacted when money was mentioned at the wrong time. You didn't analyze these moments, you absorbed them. And that absorption happened emotionally, not logically. This is why money often triggers feelings faster than thoughts. Your body reacts before your mind explains. Someone can look at a bill and feel calm. Someone else can look at the same number and feel a tightening in their chest. The difference isn't knowledge, it's conditioning. Let's look at a small, ordinary story. A woman in her 30s had a stable income and solid savings. She wasn't reckless. She planned carefully. Yet every time she considered taking a short break from work, even a well-earned one, she felt guilt and anxiety. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because rest felt unsafe. Growing up, rest was associated with falling behind, with not doing enough, with something you earned only after proving yourself. So even when she logically knew she was fine, emotionally she felt exposed. Money wasn't just money to her, it was permission. Permission to relax, permission to feel secure, permission to stop pushing. And that's a heavy thing for money to carry. This is what most people miss. Money becomes heavy, not when you lack it, but when it becomes responsible for regulating your emotions. For many people, money quietly takes on roles it was never meant to play. It becomes a buffer against fear, a shield against uncertainty, a scoreboard for self-worth. Once that happens, every financial decision feels loaded. Spending isn't just spending, it's a test of whether you're being responsible. Saving isn't just saving, it's a way to calm anxiety about the future. Earning isn't just earning, it's proof that you're still safe. This is why logic alone doesn't bring relief. You can understand compound interest, you can understand budgeting, you can understand long-term planning, and still feel tense. It's because the tension isn't coming from lack of understanding. It's coming from emotional expectation. Another story makes this even clearer. Two friends worked in similar roles, earning nearly the same amount. One checked her finances once a month and rarely thought about money otherwise. The other checked daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Same income, different weight. The second friend grew up in an environment where money was unpredictable. Unexpected expenses felt like threats. Stability never felt guaranteed. So her nervous system learned to stay alert. Even as an adult, with consistency she had created herself, her body stayed in monitoring mode. Money, to her, was something that could turn on her if she looked away. That constant vigilance is exhausting, and it's not a conscious choice. This is why telling people to stop worrying never works. Worry is often a learned reflex, not a decision. Money becomes emotional long before it becomes logical, because emotions are how humans learn safety. Logic comes later. Much later. This also explains why earning more often doesn't make money feel lighter. When income increases, expectations usually increase with it. So does the fear of losing what you've built. If money already feels like protection, more money simply raises the stakes. Now there's more to protect, more to lose, more pressure to maintain. Without addressing the emotional layer, growth can actually amplify heaviness. This is where many people get stuck. They keep trying to out-earn a feeling. But feelings don't respond to numbers, they respond to meaning. And until you understand what money means to you, not intellectually, but emotionally, it will continue to feel heavier than it needs to be. And here's the important part. None of this means you're broken, or weak, or bad with money. It means you adapted. You learned ways to feel safe in the environment you grew up in. Those adaptations may no longer be necessary, but they're still running in the background. Understanding this creates distance between who you are now and what you learned then. That distance doesn't eliminate responsibility, but it does remove shame. And when shame leaves, clarity becomes possible. In the next chapter, we'll look more closely at where your relationship with money was formed, not through choices you made, but through environments you didn't choose, and why recognizing that origin changes how money feels moving forward. Chapter 2. Where your relationship with money was really formed. Most people believe their relationship with money is shaped by decisions. What job they chose, how much they earn, whether they save or invest. But in reality, your relationship with money was formed long before you ever had real choices. It was formed by environment, not by what you were told explicitly, but by what you observed repeatedly. You learned how money felt before you learned how money worked. You learned it in the background of daily life, in how relaxed or tense the room felt when expenses came up, in whether money conversations were calm, urgent, or avoided entirely, in whether money felt predictable or like something that could suddenly disappear. Children don't need explanations to learn patterns. They read emotional signals, and those signals stay. For some people, money was always discussed with caution. For others, it was surrounded by silence. For others, it came with arguments, guilt, or blame. Each environment teaches a different lesson. One teaches vigilance, one teaches avoidance, one teaches fear. And none of these lessons are logical. They're emotional. Consider a simple example. A man grew up in a household where money problems were never discussed openly. Bills were paid, life continued, but every major purchase was followed by tension, not arguments, just a noticeable shift. Quieter voices, shorter patience, less ease in the room. No one ever said, money is a problem. But the environment said it clearly. So as an adult, this man avoided spending, even when it made sense. Not because he was frugal, but because spending triggered an emotional memory of instability. His logic said one thing, his nervous system said another. And the nervous system usually speaks louder. This is why two people can face the same financial situation and react completely differently. One sees options, the other sees risk. One feels curiosity, the other feels pressure. The difference isn't discipline, it's emotional history. Another pattern forms when money is used as a measure of approval. In some environments, money is closely tied to praise. Good grades, hard work, achievement. Money becomes proof that you're doing life correctly. This creates a quiet contract. As long as money is okay, you are okay. But that contract is fragile, because now every fluctuation feels personal. A setback doesn't just affect your finances, and it affects your sense of worth. And money starts carrying emotional weight it was never designed to carry. There's also the opposite pattern. Some people grow up in environments where money is chaotic or inconsistent. Unexpected expenses create panic. Stability feels temporary. In those environments, the lesson isn't be responsible, it's stay alert. So even when life becomes stable later on, the alertness remains. The body doesn't easily forget unpredictability. This is why some adults feel uneasy during calm financial periods. Silence feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary. They don't trust stability, because stability wasn't reliable before. None of this is conscious. You don't choose these reactions. They were learned automatically. This is an important shift to understand. Your current relationship with money is not a reflection of your intelligence or effort. It's a reflection of the environment you adapted to, and adaptation is not failure. It's survival. The problem arises when old adaptations continue running in new circumstances, when vigilance remains even when safety is present, when control remains even when flexibility is possible. Money starts to feel heavy because it's being managed by outdated emotional rules. Rules that once made sense, but no longer fit your reality. Recognizing this doesn't mean blaming the past, it means updating the present. You don't need to relive old memories in detail. You only need to notice patterns. When does money trigger tension? When does it trigger avoidance? When does it trigger overthinking? Those moments are clues. They point not to a lack of skill, but to a learned response. And once you see that, something shifts. Money stops feeling like a judgment. It starts to feel like information, not neutral yet, but lighter. In the next chapter, we'll explore why earning more rarely resolves this weight, and how increased income can sometimes deepen the pressure instead of relieving it. Chapter 3. Why earning more rarely makes money feel lighter. Most people believe there's a simple equation. More money equals less stress. It sounds reasonable, it sounds logical, and it's one of the most persistent beliefs people carry. But in practice, it rarely works that way. For many people, money doesn't feel lighter as income increases. It feels heavier. The numbers go up, but the pressure doesn't go down. Sometimes, it quietly intensifies. There's a reason for this. When your income increases, your relationship with money doesn't reset. It carries forward everything it learned before. If money already represented safety, earning more simply raises the importance of not losing it. If money already represented self-worth, earning more raises the standard you feel you must maintain. So instead of relief, you get responsibility. Instead of freedom, you get vigilance. Let's look at a familiar story. A man spent years working toward a higher-paying role. When he finally got it, there was a brief sense of excitement. Then something else replaced it. Fear. Not dramatic fear, but quiet concern. He started checking his performance more often, worrying about being replaced, questioning whether he truly deserved the position. The job gave him more money, but it also gave money more power over his emotional state. He hadn't become more anxious because he earned more. He became more anxious because now there was more to lose. This is where many people get confused. They think money should fix emotional tension, but money doesn't dissolve emotional patterns. It amplifies them. If your baseline relationship with money is calm, earning more tends to feel expansive. And if your baseline relationship with money is anxious, earning more often feels like higher stakes. That's why two people can receive the same raise and react completely differently. One feels relieved, the other feels exposed. Another subtle shift happens as income grows. Expectations rise faster than security. Lifestyle adjusts, commitments increase. People begin to rely on your stability, including you. Suddenly, money isn't just supporting your present, it's propping up a future image, a certain standard, a certain identity. And identities are fragile. Once money is tied to who you are, losing money feels like losing ground as a person. This is why some people feel trapped by success. They worked hard to get somewhere, only to discover they're now guarding it constantly. Earning more didn't remove pressure, it concentrated it. There's also another factor people rarely talk about. As income increases, comparison becomes more subtle and more relentless. You don't compare yourself to everyone anymore. You compare yourself to a narrower group. People with similar roles, similar lifestyles, similar markers of success. And in those comparisons, enough quietly disappears. There's always someone slightly ahead, slightly calmer, slightly less concerned. So money stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like a race you didn't realize you entered. None of this means earning more is bad. It means earning more doesn't automatically create peace. Peace comes from clarity, from understanding what role money is playing in your emotional life. If money is expected to eliminate uncertainty, it will always disappoint you. Uncertainty is part of being human, and money can reduce risk, but it cannot remove vulnerability. When people expect money to do that job, they give it too much responsibility, and that responsibility feels heavy. This is the point where many people try to regain control. They track more, plan more, optimize more. But control doesn't always reduce anxiety. Sometimes it sustains it. Because control is often a response to fear, not a solution to it. Money begins to feel lighter, not when income reaches a certain level, but when its role becomes clearer and smaller. When money stops being asked to prove your worth, to guarantee your future, to protect you from every possible outcome. When money returns to being a tool, not a shield. In the next chapter, we'll look at how money quietly becomes a way to buy emotional safety and control, and why that strategy, while understandable, often creates the very pressure people are trying to escape. Chapter 4. When money is used to buy safety and control. At some point, money stops being about comfort. It becomes about control. Not the obvious kind, not power over others, but control over uncertainty. For many people, money quietly turns into a buffer, something that stands between them and what they fear might happen. Fear of falling behind, fear of being unprepared, fear of losing options. So money becomes more than currency. It becomes emotional insurance. You don't just want enough money to live. You want enough money so nothing can surprise you. And that's where the wait begins. Because no amount of money can fully eliminate uncertainty. Yet many people spend their lives trying. Consider a small but revealing example. A woman had built a solid emergency fund, more than enough for real emergencies. And still, she felt uneasy spending even modest amounts. Buying something she genuinely needed triggered hesitation, not because it threatened her finances, but because spending reduced her sense of control. Her savings weren't just savings. They were reassurance. Each dollar represented distance from fear. So spending didn't feel like an exchange. It felt like exposure. This is how money quietly becomes emotional armor. The more you rely on it to feel safe, the harder it becomes to let it move. Money starts to feel locked. Not because you can't afford to spend it, but because spending weakens the shield. This is also why some people feel anxious even when their finances are objectively stable. Stability doesn't feel stable if control feels fragile. If safety depends entirely on numbers staying where they are, and any fluctuation feels threatening. Money in this role is never at rest. It must constantly perform, stay high enough, stay predictable enough, stay ahead of potential problems. That's exhausting. Another subtle shift happens when money is used to maintain identity. People don't just want money to feel safe. They want money to confirm that they're doing life correctly, that they're responsible, prepared, ahead of mistakes. So money becomes a form of self-trust. As long as the numbers look right, you trust yourself. But that trust is conditional. It depends on constant monitoring, which means peace is temporary. This is why people who are highly organized with money can still feel tense. Organization doesn't always create calm. Sometimes it creates vigilance. You're always checking, always adjusting, always thinking one step ahead. Money becomes a system you manage instead of a resource you use. And the more tightly you grip control, the more fragile it feels. This isn't because you're doing something wrong. It's because control is a response to fear, not a cure for it. Money can reduce risk, but when it's asked to eliminate uncertainty, it fails. And when it fails, people often double down. More saving, more tracking, more rules, which creates a paradox. The very behaviors meant to create safety end up reinforcing the sense that safety is never guaranteed. Money becomes heavy because it's carrying emotional responsibility it was never designed to carry. Safety isn't something money can permanently provide. It's something that comes from understanding limits, understanding that no system removes all risk, and that no buffer creates total certainty, and that trying to force money into that role only increases pressure. When money is allowed to be what it is, a tool, it becomes more flexible. When it's used as emotional protection, it becomes rigid. The shift doesn't happen by letting go of responsibility. It happens by letting go of unrealistic expectations. Money doesn't need to protect you from every outcome. It needs to support reasonable choices. That distinction matters. In the next chapter, we'll look at how comparison quietly turns money into a burden, even for people who are doing objectively well, and why measuring yourself through money almost always increases the weight you feel. Chapter 5. How comparison quietly turns money into a burden. Comparison is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel aggressive. It usually feels reasonable. That's what makes it dangerous. Most people don't wake up thinking, "I'm going to compare myself today." They simply notice someone else's lifestyle, someone else's pace, someone else's apparent calm. And quietly, without intending to, money changes meaning. Money stops being about what you need. It becomes about where you stand. This shift happens so subtly that most people never catch it. They assume the pressure they feel is financial, but it's social. Let's start with something simple. A man scrolls through his phone at night. He sees someone he knows buying a house, another traveling comfortably, and another talking casually about options. Nothing dramatic happens in his mind. No jealousy spike, no conscious reaction. But the next morning, money feels heavier. Not because his situation changed, but because the reference point did. Before comparison, his finances felt adequate. After comparison, they felt behind. This is how comparison works. It doesn't change your reality. It changes your context, and context is everything. Money becomes a burden when it's no longer measured against your life, but against someone else's highlight reel. What's especially exhausting is that comparison today has no natural limit. In the past, people compared themselves to a small circle. Neighbors, co-workers, friends. Now, the circle is endless. So there is always someone earning slightly more, living slightly easier, appearing slightly more relaxed. And because these images are curated, the comparison is unfair by design. You don't compare your full life to their full life. You compare your internal experience to their external presentation. Money absorbs that distortion. It becomes the scoreboard of a game you never agreed to play. This is where the weight intensifies. You stop asking, "Is this enough for me?" You start asking, "Is this enough compared to them?" And that question has no stable answer, because them keeps changing. Another quiet effect of comparison is urgency. When you measure yourself against others, time speeds up. You start feeling late, behind, outpaced, even if nothing is actually wrong. This urgency attaches itself to money. Suddenly, money isn't just about support, it's about catching up, and catching up is stressful by nature. Here's a story that illustrates this well. Two colleagues worked in similar fields for years. Comparable income, comparable stability. One was content, focused on incremental progress. The other felt constant pressure. The difference wasn't ambition, it was comparison. The second colleague paid close attention to milestones. Who got promoted first, who upgraded lifestyles faster, who seemed more established. Each comparison created a small internal adjustment. Expectations rose, patience shrank. Money didn't feel like a resource anymore. It felt like a measuring stick, and measuring sticks are heavy to carry. This is also how comparison turns neutral decisions into emotional ones. Spending stops being about value. It becomes about signaling. Saving stops being about security. It becomes about adequacy. Earning stops being about contribution. It becomes about ranking. None of this is intentional, it's automatic. And once money is tied to status, even subtly, peace becomes fragile. Because status is unstable. There's always someone ahead and someone watching. Another overlooked aspect of comparison is how it reshapes enough. Enough is a feeling, not a number, and comparison erodes that feeling. When you compare, enough keeps moving. What felt sufficient last year feels tight this year. What felt comfortable now feels provisional. So money becomes heavier, not because it's lacking, but because satisfaction is constantly postponed. You're always almost there. Almost safe, almost relaxed, almost settled. Almost is exhausting. There's also a deeper layer here. Comparison doesn't just involve money. It involves identity. People don't compare numbers in isolation. They compare what those numbers seem to represent: competence, maturity, success, stability. So when money feels behind, it doesn't just feel financial. It feels personal. A person doesn't think, "I have less money than them." They think, "I'm falling behind in life." That's a heavy thought to carry every day. This is why comparison-based pressure doesn't disappear with higher income. Often, it intensifies. As income rises, the comparison group narrows, but sharpens. You stop comparing yourself to everyone. You compare yourself to peers. People who feel closer, more relevant, more threatening to your sense of adequacy. And because the gap is smaller, it feels more painful. Money becomes a constant reminder of position. This is also why many people feel most financial stress during periods when they are objectively doing well. They're close enough to see the next tier, and close enough to feel that they're not quite there. That tension is draining. So how does money become lighter again? Not by avoiding awareness, and not by pretending comparison doesn't exist, but by changing what money is for. Money feels lighter when it stops being used to measure your worth. When it returns to being a tool for your life, not a proxy for your progress as a human being. This requires redefining success internally, not socially. Asking different questions, not "How do I rank? How do I look? How far ahead am I?" But, does my money support my actual life? Does it reduce stress or create it? Does it give me room to think clearly? These questions don't eliminate ambition. They ground it. They bring money back into proportion. Because money was never meant to tell you who you are. It was meant to support what you value. When that boundary blurs, money becomes heavy. When that boundary is restored, money becomes quieter. Not perfect, not effortless, but lighter. In the next chapter, we'll look at why temperament matters more than intelligence with money, and how calm, often underestimated traits quietly determine who feels at ease financially over time. Chapter 6. Temperament matters more than intelligence. With money, most people assume money is a thinking problem. If you understand enough, if you're smart enough, if you make the right calculations, things should work out. But when you look closely at how people actually experience money, a different pattern emerges. The people who feel the calmest around money are not always the smartest. They're not necessarily the most informed. They're rarely the most sophisticated. They're the most emotionally steady. This is uncomfortable to admit, because we like to believe intelligence protects us. That if we think clearly enough, money will stop feeling heavy. But money doesn't respond primarily to intelligence. It responds to temperament. Temperament is how you react under uncertainty, how you behave when outcomes aren't clear, how you sit with discomfort without needing immediate relief. Money is full of uncertainty. Markets change, jobs shift, expenses appear unexpectedly, plans evolve. No amount of intelligence removes that. So the real question isn't, how smart are you with money? It's, how do you behave when money doesn't behave predictably? Let's look at a simple contrast. Two people understand the same financial principles. They've read similar books. They have access to the same information. One remains relatively calm during fluctuations. The other feels constant tension. The difference isn't knowledge, it's reaction speed. The calmer person doesn't need to act immediately. They don't feel compelled to fix every feeling as soon as it appears. The anxious person does, and that difference compounds over time. Here's a story that illustrates this well. A young professional was extremely intelligent, analytical, well-read. He understood long-term thinking intellectually, but emotionally, he struggled with waiting. Whenever money felt uncertain, he needed to do something. Reallocate, adjust, change direction. Each action felt like control, but over time, those reactions created complexity, stress, decision fatigue. Another colleague with less technical knowledge approached money differently. She moved slower. She tolerated ambiguity better. She didn't interpret every fluctuation as a problem. Her decisions were fewer, but steadier. Years later, she felt far more at ease financially. Not because she was smarter, but because she was calmer. This is a pattern you see everywhere once you know how to look. People who struggle with money often struggle with emotional regulation, not math. They feel discomfort and rush to resolve it. They confuse relief with progress. Money punishes that reflex quietly, not immediately, not dramatically, but over time. Temperament determines whether you overreact or absorb, whether you escalate or stabilize, whether money becomes a source of constant feedback or a background system. Another subtle way temperament shows up is through sensitivity. Highly sensitive people often feel money more intensely. They notice small changes. They feel risk more vividly. They anticipate future scenarios easily. This can look like foresight, but it can also turn into chronic stress. Sensitivity without emotional grounding makes money louder. Every signal becomes meaningful. Every decision feels weighted. This is why some intelligent, thoughtful people feel exhausted by money. They're not careless. They're too aware. They process every possibility, and money becomes mentally taxing because it never gets to rest. Contrast this with people who have moderate awareness but strong emotional boundaries. They don't analyze everything. They don't internalize every outcome. They allow money to exist without constant interpretation. That ability creates space. Space creates calm. Calm allows better decisions. Over time, this becomes self-reinforcing. Another story makes this even clearer. A couple managed their finances together. One partner loved details, tracked everything, planned extensively. The other focused on consistency, simple rules, clear boundaries. When stress appeared, the first partner tightened control. The second slowed down. Over time, the second partner felt lighter about money, even though they were less involved in the specifics. Not because they cared less, but because they trusted process more than emotion. This highlights something important. Money rewards emotional stability more than cognitive sophistication, because emotional stability allows time to do its work, and time is the real multiplier. Intelligence often wants answers now. Temperament allows waiting. Intelligence asks, what's the optimal move? Temperament asks, can I stay steady through this phase? Money tends to favor the second question. This also explains why some people repeatedly sabotage themselves financially. They don't lack ability. They lack tolerance. They can't tolerate boredom. They can't tolerate uncertainty. They can't tolerate slow progress. So they seek stimulation. They change strategies. They chase new ideas. They respond emotionally to short-term signals. Money becomes reactive, and reactive systems are unstable. Temperament shows up even in small, everyday decisions. How do you feel when money sits unused? How do you feel when progress is invisible? How do you feel when others seem to move faster? These feelings guide behavior more than logic does. A calm temperament doesn't eliminate ambition. It channels it. It turns ambition into patience rather than urgency. It allows you to separate discomfort from danger, and that separation is crucial. Because money creates discomfort naturally. There are always unknowns. If discomfort is interpreted as threat, the money becomes heavy. If discomfort is tolerated as part of the process, money becomes manageable. This is why many people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline is force. But real financial discipline is emotional restraint, the ability to not react, to pause, to observe, to allow systems to work. That restraint doesn't come from intelligence. It comes from temperament, and temperament is not fixed. But it is trained slowly, through awareness, through reducing unnecessary stimulation, through learning to sit with incomplete information. When people develop this capacity, money starts to feel quieter, not because nothing goes wrong, but because fewer things feel urgent. Urgency is the enemy of financial peace. And urgency is a temperament issue, not a knowledge issue. This reframes the entire conversation. And instead of asking, "How can I learn more about money?" a more useful question becomes, "How can I relate to money with more steadiness?" That shift doesn't show up immediately in numbers, but it shows up in sleep, in decision quality, in how much space money takes up in your mind. Over time, those things compound. In the next chapter, we'll look at the hidden cost of carrying financial fear for too long, and how long-term fear quietly shapes decisions in ways people rarely notice until much later. Chapter 7. The hidden cost of carrying financial fear for too long. Financial fear rarely arrives all at once. It doesn't usually begin with panic or crisis. It begins quietly, as caution, as vigilance, as a sense that you should be careful, just in case. At first, this fear seems useful. It keeps you alert. It prevents reckless decisions. It pushes you to prepare. But when fear stays for too long, it changes character. It stops being a guide. It becomes a lens. And through that lens, every financial decision looks heavier than it actually is. Most people don't realize how long they've been carrying financial fear. They confuse it with responsibility. They say things like, "I'm just being realistic. I like to be prepared. I don't want to get complacent." And sometimes that's true. But over time, fear quietly reshapes behavior. Not in dramatic ways, but in subtle, cumulative ones. Fear makes you prioritize safety over clarity, protection over possibility, avoidance over engagement. And while none of these choices look wrong on their own, together they create a life that feels constrained. Let's talk about what long-term financial fear actually does. First, it narrows your decision-making. When fear is present, the brain looks for certainty. It prefers familiar paths, predictable outcomes, options that feel controllable. This means people stuck in financial fear often avoid decisions that require patience or tolerance for ambiguity. They don't necessarily make bad choices. They make defensive ones. Over time, those defensive choices accumulate. They limit growth. They reduce optionality. And they trade long-term flexibility for short-term reassurance. Here's a story that illustrates this well. A man spent years building financial stability after a period of real hardship. He saved aggressively. He avoided risk. He kept expenses low. These habits made sense at first, but years later, when his situation had clearly changed, his behavior hadn't. Opportunities that required delayed payoff made him uneasy. Any decision that reduced his cash buffer, even temporarily, felt dangerous. Not because the risk was unreasonable, but because fear had become his default setting. He wasn't responding to present reality. He was responding to an old one. This is one of the hidden costs of long-term fear. It outlives the circumstances that created it. Another cost is cognitive load. Fear keeps money constantly active in your mind. You think about it while resting, while planning, while enjoying things. Even when nothing is wrong, money occupies mental space. This constant background processing is exhausting. People often say they feel tired about money, even when their finances are stable. This fatigue doesn't come from managing money. It comes from carrying it mentally at all times. Fear makes money feel urgent, even when it isn't. Urgency compresses time. It makes everything feel like it must be addressed now, optimized now, secured now. Living in that state for years takes a toll. Another subtle cost of long-term fear is how it affects trust. Not just trust in systems or markets, but trust in yourself. When fear dominates your financial life, you begin to doubt your own judgment. You double-check decisions, second-guess choices. Look for reassurance constantly. This creates a loop. The more you doubt yourself, the more you seek certainty. The more you seek certainty, the less confident you feel. Money becomes the arena where this loop plays out most clearly. Every decision feels consequential. Every mistake feels threatening. Even small missteps carry emotional weight far beyond their actual impact. There's also a relational cost. People carrying financial fear often avoid open conversations about money. Not because they don't care, but because money feels emotionally charged. They don't want to confront the anxiety or risk exposing uncertainty. So money becomes private, even isolating. This can affect partnerships, families, friendships. Not through conflict, but through silence. And silence keeps fear alive. Another long-term cost is misalignment. Fear focuses attention on what could go wrong. Alignment focuses attention on what actually matters. When fear runs the show, priorities skew. You may say you value freedom, but choose rigidity. You may say you value peace, but choose constant monitoring. You may say you value growth, but avoid situations where growth is uncertain. These contradictions aren't failures of character. They're the natural outcome of long-held fear. Fear is persuasive. It presents itself as wisdom. It says, better safe than sorry. Now isn't the time. Maybe later. And later quietly becomes never. One of the most overlooked consequences of financial fear is how it shapes identity. People begin to see themselves as cautious by nature. Risk-averse, conservative. They build a story around that identity. I'm just not someone who does that. I prefer to stay on the safe side. That's not how I operate. Over time, this identity hardens. Fear stops being a response to circumstances and becomes part of who you think you are. And identities are difficult to challenge. Even when fear no longer serves you, it feels familiar, comfortable in a strange way. Because fear gives you a sense of control. Letting go of it can feel like stepping into the unknown. This is why many people stay stuck in financial fear long after their situation has improved. Not because they want to suffer, but because fear feels safer than uncertainty. There's a final, deeper cost to carrying financial fear for too long, and it distorts how you experience the present. When fear is always oriented toward what might happen, it pulls attention away from what is happening. You don't fully enjoy progress. You don't register stability. You don't feel relief when it's earned. Money becomes something you're always preparing with, not something you live with. This creates a strange paradox. You work hard to build security, but never feel secure. Not because security isn't there, but because fear doesn't recognize it. Fear doesn't update automatically. It requires awareness. The good news is this: financial fear isn't permanent. It's not a personality trait. It's not a life sentence. It's a learned response to uncertainty, and learned responses can be softened, not by forcing optimism, not by ignoring risk, but by noticing when fear is no longer proportional to reality, by recognizing when vigilance has become habit rather than necessity, by allowing yourself to recalibrate. This doesn't mean becoming reckless. It means becoming accurate. responding to present conditions, not past trauma. When fear loosens its grip, money starts to feel different. Not carefree, not effortless, but quieter, less demanding, less central. And that quiet creates space. Space to think, space to choose, space to live. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when wealth is redefined, not as accumulation, but as peace, and how that single shift changes the entire emotional experience of money. One of the most subtle consequences of long-term financial fear is how it changes your sense of time. Fear pulls your attention forward, not in a hopeful way, but in a vigilant one. You're always preparing for something that might happen. A downturn, a mistake, a surprise expense, a shift you didn't see coming. So your mind lives slightly ahead of your life. This creates a constant state of mental displacement. You are never fully here, because part of you is always managing the future. Over time, this changes how life feels. Moments of stability don't register as stability, they feel temporary. Progress doesn't feel satisfying, it feels fragile. And because nothing ever feels secure enough, fear never relaxes. Another hidden cost is how fear distorts risk perception. When fear is carried for too long, it stops responding to actual probabilities. It responds to emotional memory. Events that were once painful or destabilizing get weighted far more heavily than neutral outcomes. So the mind overestimates danger. This is why some people avoid reasonable risks long after they are capable of handling them. Not because the risks are objectively high, but because fear remembers a time when risk felt overwhelming. This distortion quietly shapes life paths. People stay in roles longer than they want, delay transitions that would actually be manageable, avoid opportunities that don't come with guaranteed outcomes. They don't frame these choices as fear. They frame them as prudence. But prudence guided by outdated fear slowly narrows a life. There is also an emotional numbness that can develop. When fear is constant, the nervous system adapts by dampening sensation. People stop feeling sharp anxiety, but they also stop feeling ease. Money doesn't create panic anymore, but it also doesn't create joy. It becomes flat, sound heavy, but dull. This is why some people say money feels draining rather than stressful. They're not reacting intensely, they're reacting continuously, and continuous low-level tension is harder to notice and harder to resolve. Another important consequence is how fear reshapes generosity. When money is tightly linked to safety, giving feels risky. Not just large giving. Even small acts of generosity can feel uncomfortable. Because giving reduces buffers, it weakens the shield. So people become cautious not only with spending, but with sharing. This doesn't make them selfish, it makes them guarded. And over time, guardedness reinforces the belief that money must be held tightly to remain safe. Fear teaches scarcity, even when scarcity is no longer present. One of the deepest costs of long-term financial fear is missed recalibration. Life changes, circumstances improve, skills grow, resilience increases, but fear doesn't automatically update. Unless it is consciously questioned, it keeps operating on old assumptions. This creates a mismatch. Your capacity grows, but your internal rules stay the same. So you continue to live as if margins are thin, even when they are not. As if mistakes are catastrophic, even when they are survivable. As if stability is fragile, even when it has proven durable. That mismatch is where money feels most confusing. On the outside, things look solid. On the inside, they feel tense. Recognizing this mismatch is not about dismissing fear, it's about recontextualizing it. Understanding that fear was once useful, that it helped you survive uncertainty. But usefulness has an expiration date. Fear that is no longer aligned with reality becomes weight. The moment people begin to notice this, something shifts. They don't suddenly become fearless. They become more accurate. They start asking better questions. Not, what if everything goes wrong, but what is actually likely now? Not, how do I protect against every outcome, but what level of risk is reasonable for the life I want? These questions don't remove uncertainty. They restore proportion, and proportion is what fear lacks. When fear regains proportion, money begins to soften. It stops feeling like a constant threat to manage and starts feeling like a resource to engage with. Still serious, still important, but no longer oppressive, as this is the quiet turning point. Not dramatic relief, not sudden confidence, just a gradual loosening. And in that space, something new becomes possible. Not reckless behavior, not blind optimism, but a calmer, more honest relationship with money. One that reflects who you are now, not who you had to be before. Chapter 8. Redefining wealth as peace, not accumulation. Most people don't consciously choose to chase money. They chase relief. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from pressure. Relief from the feeling that something could go wrong at any moment. Money becomes the symbol of that relief. So the pursuit of money slowly turns into the pursuit of peace, even though most people never name it that way. This is where confusion begins. Because money can support peace, but it cannot replace it, and when money is asked to do that job, it inevitably disappoints. For many people, wealth is defined by accumulation. More saved, more invested, more secured. And on the surface, this makes sense. Accumulation feels measurable, objective, safe. But accumulation without peace creates a paradox. You can have more and feel less settled. You can be further ahead and feel more tense. You can be objectively secure and subjectively uneasy. This is the quiet contradiction that runs through modern financial life. People build and build, but never arrive. Because arrival was never clearly defined. When wealth is defined as accumulation, there is no natural stopping point. There is always more to protect, more to optimize, more to manage. Peace keeps getting postponed. First, it's once I hit this number. Then it's once things are more stable. Then it's once I'm absolutely sure. Absolutely sure never comes. So money stays active in the mind, always relevant, always demanding attention. This is why redefining wealth is not philosophical. It's practical. Wealth defined as peace changes the entire relationship with money. Peace doesn't mean the absence of responsibility. It means the absence of constant internal pressure. It's the feeling that money is not evaluating you, that it doesn't decide your worth, that it doesn't need to be monitored obsessively to keep you safe. Peace is when money supports your life without dominating your thoughts. This kind of wealth is quieter than accumulation. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up as excitement. It shows up as mental space, the ability to think clearly, to make decisions without urgency, to experience progress without immediately looking for the next threat. This is why people who redefine wealth often appear less reactive. They still care about money. They still plan, they still prepare, but they don't feel chased by it. They don't interpret every fluctuation as a signal. Seeing they don't feel personally judged by every outcome. Money becomes contextual, not central. Let's look at a simple example. Two people have similar net worths. One constantly checks accounts, forecasts scenarios, and replays decisions. The other reviews finances periodically and then returns attention to life. Same numbers, different wealth. The difference isn't discipline, it's orientation. One sees money as the main axis of stability. The other sees it as one component among many. This difference changes everything. When wealth is peace-based, money has limits. It is allowed to help, but not to dominate. Allowed to reduce risk, but not to eliminate uncertainty. Allowed to support comfort, but not to define identity. Those boundaries lighten money's emotional load. And when money carries less emotional weight, it becomes easier to manage. Another important shift happens when wealth is redefined this way. Time slows down. When accumulation is the goal, time always feels scarce. You feel behind, late, pressured to optimize every phase. But when peace is the goal, time regains depth. You allow processes to unfold. You stop rushing decisions to relieve discomfort. You stop forcing outcomes just to feel settled. This doesn't mean complacency. It means patience with direction. Wealth as peace values sustainability over speed. It prioritizes decisions you can live with, not just decisions that look good on paper. This is why people who experience this shift often describe money as quieter, not because they stopped thinking about it entirely, but because it stopped demanding constant interpretation. That money no longer needs to explain who they are or where they stand. It becomes factual again, numbers without narrative. This also changes how people respond to fear. Fear doesn't disappear, but it stops running the system. When wealth is defined as peace, fear is treated as information, not instruction. You notice it, you consider it, but you don't automatically obey it. This creates resilience, not bravado, not denial. Resilience is the ability to feel uncertainty without immediately restructuring your life around it. And resilience is one of the rarest forms of wealth. Another overlooked aspect of peace-based wealth is choice. Not unlimited choice, but meaningful choice. The ability to say no without panic. The ability to pause without guilt. The ability to adjust without self-blame. These choices don't show up in spreadsheets, but they define quality of life. People often assume freedom comes from large numbers. In reality, freedom comes from low internal pressure. When pressure is low, options expand. When pressure is high, even abundance feels tight. This is why some people with modest means feel free, while others with significant resources feel constrained. Freedom is not a function of accumulation alone. It's a function of how much weight money carries in your mind. Redefining wealth doesn't require giving anything up. It requires repositioning. Money moves from center stage to support role. Important, but not primary. Serious, but not sacred. Useful, but not personal. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, through small recalibrations, through noticing when money is being asked to do emotional work, through separating security from perfection, through allowing enough to be felt rather than postponed. When people make this shift, something interesting happens. They often make better financial decisions, not because they care less, but because they see more clearly. Urgency clouds judgment. Peace clarifies it. Fear shortens time horizons. Calm extends them. This is why peace-based wealth tends to be durable. It doesn't depend on constant vigilance. It doesn't require constant validation. It's built on alignment rather than accumulation. Alignment between values and behavior, between resources and priorities, between money and life. This is the quiet endpoint of the journey you've been on through this audiobook. Not a finish line, but a reframing. Money stops being something you chase for relief and becomes something you steward with clarity. It stops being a source of constant evaluation and becomes a background system that supports your choices. This doesn't make life perfect, but it makes it lighter. And lightness is often the real goal people were chasing all along. In the conclusion, we'll bring everything together. Not by summarizing ideas, but by anchoring a new way of relating to money that you can carry forward without effort or pressure. Money doesn't suddenly become easy when you understand it, but it does become quieter. And quiet is often what people were looking for all along. Throughout this audiobook, we didn't talk about tactics, shortcuts, or guarantees. We talked about something more subtle and more lasting. how money feels, how it lives in your mind, how it quietly shapes your decisions, your patience, and your sense of safety. If there's one idea worth carrying forward, it's this. Money becomes heavy when it is asked to do emotional work it was never meant to do. When it's expected to remove fear, to prove worth, to guarantee certainty, to protect you from every possible outcome. No amount of money can fully succeed at that task. And when money fails at it, people assume they need more money, instead of realizing the expectation itself is the problem. And understanding this doesn't make you careless, it makes you accurate. It allows you to see money for what it actually is, a tool, a system, a resource. Important, yes, but not personal. When money stops being personal, something shifts internally. Decisions slow down. Urgency loosens. The constant mental monitoring begins to fade. You don't stop caring about money. You stop carrying it everywhere. This is what financial maturity really looks like. Not excitement, not bravado, not the absence of concern, but steadiness. The ability to live your life without constantly negotiating with your finances in your head. The ability to let money support your choices without defining them. For many people, this shift feels unfamiliar at first, almost uncomfortable, because calm can feel strange when you've lived with pressure for a long time. But calm is not complacency, it's capacity. It gives you room to think clearly, to respond instead of react, to choose long-term alignment over short-term relief. Money doesn't need to disappear from your life for this to happen. It just needs to move to its proper place. When it does, wealth stops feeling like a moving target. It becomes something quieter and more grounded. The ability to rest without guilt. The ability to pause without fear. The ability to make decisions without needing immediate reassurance. These are not things you buy, they are things you allow. And allowance comes from understanding. If this audiobook helped you see money a little differently, if it gave language to feelings you've carried quietly, then it has done its job. There's nothing you need to rush into after this. No action list, and no pressure to change everything at once. Just awareness, and awareness has a way of doing its own work over time. Money will still be part of your life tomorrow, but it doesn't have to weigh the same. Sometimes, the most meaningful progress isn't visible. It's felt. And when money finally stops feeling heavy, you realize that what you were really building all along was not just wealth, but peace.